So I just bought this game, and I figured, as a Norse pagan, it may have drawn other people's attention to it just by the name, and I figured, hey, review it, I guess. Now, one thing that's important to note is that most people are going to be used to hearing that word that's part of the suffix pronounced as weird, as in Hellboy, Web of Weird, etc. However, this game pronounces it in a way that I definitely have heard before, but not too often. They pronounce it as Wyrd, which, while less common, I have been told is more accurate. And to me, actually does make sense if you think of the Web of Weird as effectively what it is an artistic representation that you can indeed find all of the runes in. Especially if we're to associate the runes directly with Galder. It's also worthy to note that this was the last work of the late Lance Solomon Reddick, who voices Hellboy.
Only if you're gonna kick the bucket, right? Always seemed pretty useful to me.
While I do think it takes some getting used to, he does a really good job. If I would do a comparison to accurately say what kind of playstyle this is, I would say it's kind of a not quite over the shoulder, but it's definitely like camera is behind the protagonist version of Hades, because this game is definitely played very much like a roguelike or a roguelite. I'm going to use both words just because I've seen both of those words used so much I'm not sure which one is which. And personally, I find the artwork of the game, both in cutscenes and in the playing of it, very breathtaking, especially because it is in Mike Magnolia's style. Specifically, I see a lot of resemblance with the Seed of Destruction era of the comics. Which makes a lot of sense, as these were the comics that directly inspired the Guillermo del Toro films, which are the most fan-favorite and critically acclaimed of the Hellboy series. And effectively, the game is that there are disasters happening in the real world, and we use the machine that you see right here to effectively astral travel to, as the game puts it, the Wyrd. Which is this, while very brown, still very ethereal plane of existence with a lot of mysticism and enemies. And while in this world you receive blessings, and the very shape of it is why I specifically made the Hades comparison. And they do keep with the mythology in, as you see here. Yes, the Norns are both mentioned and seen. But there's an interesting mix of a lot of mythologies here, because as I stated, you will meet and interact with the Norns. But you will also meet, pretty much first, excuse my pronunciation, Scheherazade, which is the name associated with, and is indeed one of the protagonists herself, of 1001 Nights. Specifically, she was one of the wives of a sultan who was known to execute his wives, and she kept telling a story and would basically leave cliffhangers that would leave her alive the next day. It's a very popular story, but I almost actually never hear this name. She herself seems to be the narrator and the driving force behind all this, and is the main person who actually gives you these various blessings. And these blessings can be applied to whatever weapon you have, which is essentially your fist. You can punch enemies, you can also shoot enemies, and I have not gotten it yet, but you eventually get a charm. And Scheherazade definitely does seem to be a driving force, and is definitely taking this as almost a game to see how good of a story you're going to make this. Saying that you both earn the dressings and she gives them to you to up the drama of it all. With a lot of talk of how deserving Hellboy is to be the protagonist. Which is interesting in both like a meta way and the storyline of Hellboy as a whole kind of way. Because if you're familiar with the character, like, Hellboy's everything from his purpose to how he lives his life and all of that is very important to the kind of meta plot. And while, yes, I did somewhat complain earlier about the game being kind of brown, I do think that it does make the color pop, As in, obviously, it makes your main character stand out, and it obviously makes any sort of other color really stand out, as you can see in both Hellboy and the background here. There are also breakable environments, which, as you can see here, give you the option to throw them at enemies if you're able to have the time and strategic positioning. While I'm enjoying my time playing, there are some bizarre environmental clipping issues. The game is also kind of catering to comic fans more than movie fans, as the majority of the characters are like Benson here, who is kind of the folklorist of the Hellboy team. And each time that you dive into the Wyrd, you can go into different realms, such as the Brown Realm you saw before being the Forgotten Kingdom, the boss there being the Forgotten King. And here, which I just entered, is the Unseelie Realm. Now, I obviously haven't finished the game yet, but already, for, a little over $25, so far it's well worth the price. And this was made by a very small British studio, so for who worked on it, this is amazing. Now, it's also a very safe game. The controls aren't complicated, a lot of the upgrades and everything are really simplistic, and even though you're gonna have some trouble with maybe the first, maybe half hour, once you get into the rhythm of the game, and the fact that while there's a variety of enemies, there's only 4 kinds of attacks except for bosses, you're gonna start doing alright. Now, is the game going to be the next, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, getting people into Norse paganism with some misconceptions? I really don't think so. With the variety of things we're talking about here, I don't think that it has that much depth, at least so far. I have not finished the game, I'm still pretty early. And while it does somewhat vaguely talk about some occultic concepts, such as the basically bringing architecture into magic, I don't think it goes too deeply with that, and it's mostly using fictional characters to do so, or fictional representations of them, such as the person who built the house that is the gateway is a completely fictional occultist. Ultimately, I think it's going to be, at least as far as video games go, a relatively cheap good time. Maybe a lot of moments of excitableness if you're really into folklore like I am, but I understand if that's not everyone's shebang. And some of the executions for some of the mid-tier enemies are pretty cool. But I think if you can get past the first couple minutes with the playstyle, because, it's a little rough, a little slow at first, but, again, rhythm once you get into it. It's going to be mostly a narrative-driven experience for you that I do think people will enjoy, smile at. Now, my opinions might change as I, get through more of the game and I'm not, trying to play while also doing, a relatively early first impressions review of it. But, yeah, so far, thumbs up from me. And I hope you all enjoyed watching, and thank you for doing so.